The Sanctuary. September 2014. One of America's most celebrated comedians passed away at age 81. In her personal belongings, they found something unexpected. A letter, written and torn apart, over and over again. Hundreds of fragments, same words, same name. The letter began, "I'm sorry," but it was never sent, because the person she was writing to had been gone for 9 years. And for 22 years before that, he never once picked up the phone when she called. Why? Because this woman was one of 8 people who disappeared from Johnny Carson's world, completely, permanently, as if they never existed. Some because of betrayal, some because of violence, and some for reasons they never understood. But all of them share one thing in common. Tonight, we're not just exploring 8 stories of disappearance. We're answering a question that haunts anyone who's ever built walls around their heart. What turns a gentle man into someone who never forgives, and why we might be doing the same thing? But first, let's go back to 1986 and the phone call this woman could never bring herself to make. The 11:30 ritual. Every night at 11:30, a ritual took place in millions of American homes. Fathers turned off the living room lights. Mothers poured a glass of whiskey or made a cup of tea. And families settled into their familiar couches. The golf swing, the rainbow curtain, and Ed McMahon's voice. "Here's Johnny." For 30 years, from 1962 to 1992, Johnny Carson wasn't just a television program. He was the gatekeeper to America's sleep, the transition between the day's chaos and the night's peace. By the numbers, his power was absolute. 60 million viewers every night. If you wanted to sell a book, promote a movie, introduce a new album, you had to pass through Johnny Carson. There was no alternative. No viral moment on TikTok, just one door. And Carson held the only key. You know, our generation had something that younger people today don't. Certainty. The certainty that at 11:30, Johnny would be there. The certainty that he would make us laugh, not the crude, uncomfortable laugh of modern comedy, but the gentle laugh that felt like a hand on your shoulder after a long day. I'm bringing this up because what we're about to explore isn't just about a man who removed a few guests from his show. This is about the last era when honor still meant something, and the price one man paid to protect it. But here's what most people never knew. There were 2 Johnny Carsons. The 2 Johnnies, the Johnny America loved. A gentleman from the Midwest, always impeccably dressed, that warm smile like Nebraska sunshine, making everyone, from movie stars to everyday people, feel comfortable, valued, heard. And the Johnny that Hollywood feared. He operated like a Sicilian Don, a longtime producer once revealed. He never raised his voice, never made public scenes. He simply removed you from his life, completely, as if you had never existed. And with The Tonight Show's power, 60 million viewers every night being erased by Carson didn't just mean losing one show. It meant losing your career, your visibility, your future. Sound harsh? But think about this. In an era without internet, without social media, The Tonight Show was the only door through which the entire nation could see you. Close that door, and you vanished into darkness. But here's the question that will haunt this entire story. Why would a man who seemed so gracious, so kind on camera, be so unforgiving off it? The answer begins not in Hollywood, but in Nebraska, 1925, in a house where love was never free. The boy from Nebraska. Johnny Carson was born in a small town called Corning, Iowa, but grew up in Norfolk, Nebraska. His father, Homer Carson, was a power company manager. A silent man, cold, never showed emotion. His mother, Ruth, was a woman who demanded perfection and never gave praise. There's a story Carson once told, years later, to a close friend. When he was 10 years old, he performed magic tricks at the local county fair. He did it perfectly. The audience applauded wildly. Afterward, he ran to his mother. "Mom, did I do good?" Ruth looked down at him. "Your shirt is dirty," and walked away. That was the first lesson Johnny learned. Love is not a right, it's a reward, and you have to be perfect to earn it. Now, here's something almost no one knows. In 1951, when Carson was 26 years old, he was fired from a radio station in Omaha. The reason? Too sensitive to criticism, his boss said. "You're fragile as glass. One small critique, and you fall apart." 33 years later, that man, fragile as glass, became the most powerful person in American entertainment. Someone who could end any career with a single word. So here's the question we need to ask. Is this story about power, or about a wounded child who finally found a way to make sure no one could hurt him again? Let's find out, starting with the person he loved most and hurt the most. The Fractures, Joan Rivers. The Betrayal of Mentorship. The Protégé. The first person wasn't just a guest. She was the daughter Johnny Carson never had. In 1965, this woman, a struggling comedian in a world that had no room for women in comedy, appeared on The Tonight Show for the first time. Carson saw something in her. Not just talent, but hunger, authenticity. The kind of raw brilliance you can't manufacture. He did something unprecedented. He made her the first permanent guest host in the show's history. The first woman to sit in that chair. "He didn't just give me a platform," she once said. "He gave me permission to exist." For 21 years, they were family. He advised her on material, invited her to private dinners at his Malibu home, publicly championed her talent in an era when female comedians were routinely dismissed as novelties. She used to say that Carson was the first powerful man in television who didn't ask for anything in return for his support. He championed her purely on talent, and she was deeply, profoundly grateful. Which is why what happened in 1986 devastated him so completely. The betrayal began quietly. Fox, a fledgling network challenging the Big Three's dominance, approached her with an extraordinary offer. Her own late-night talk show, $10 million a year, broadcasting directly opposite Carson. For someone approaching her 50s in an industry notoriously cruel to aging women, this wasn't just about money. It was about survival. NBC executives had made it clear, when Carson eventually retired, she would not be considered as his replacement. Despite everything she'd done, despite 21 years of loyalty. You know that feeling, don't you? When you've given everything to something, a job, a relationship, a dream, and you realize it will never give back what you've put in? That's where she found herself. She accepted Fox's offer, but faced an excruciating dilemma. How to tell Carson, the man who had made her career, whom she genuinely loved as a mentor and friend. She was terrified of that conversation, a producer who worked with her confirmed. She kept delaying it, hoping to find the perfect moment, the perfect words. That moment never came. Fox leaked the news to the press before she could tell Carson personally. He learned about her departure not from her, not from a phone call, but from a headline in Variety magazine. For a man whose childhood was marked by emotional abandonment, a distant father, a mother who withheld approval, this perceived betrayal cut to the core of his deepest insecurities. Johnny went white as a sheet when he saw the headline, recalled a staff member who was present that day. He didn't yell, didn't throw things. He simply said, "She didn't even call me," and walked into his office. That quiet hurt was more disturbing than any explosion could have been. Carson's response was swift and absolute. He immediately ordered that her name never be mentioned on The Tonight Show again. All clips featuring her were removed from compilation shows. Guest hosts were instructed never to reference her. It was as if she had never existed in the show's history. "He told me, she's dead to me," revealed Carson's longtime producer, Fred de Cordova. And when Johnny said someone was dead to him, he meant it literally. They ceased to exist in his world. She attempted repeatedly to apologize, sent letters, called Carson's private number, even sent elaborate gifts to his home. Each attempt was met with the same response: silence. The packages came back marked "Return to Sender," remembered her assistant. The calls were never returned. It was as if she was screaming into a void. For 22 years, every time this woman picked up the phone to call Carson, she would write out what she wanted to say. "Johnny, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I miss you." But she never pressed the buttons, because she knew, even if he answered, his voice would be cold as ice. Or worse, he would say nothing at all. And that silence would be heavier than any curse. The removal extended far beyond The Tonight Show. Carson's influence meant she became persona non grata throughout NBC and much of the television industry. Former friends suddenly became unavailable. Invitations dried up. Her Fox show launched with fanfare, but struggled in the ratings against Carson. It was canceled within a year. Her career entered a devastating tailspin. But here's something that never made the news. 1 month after she was erased from Carson's world, NBC invited Arsenio Hall to be a guest host. Hall hosted 90 episodes, more than she was ever allowed to host. She had worked with Carson for 21 years. Hall? 2 years. The difference? Hall was a man. So we have to ask, was this really about betrayal? Or about something Carson didn't want to admit, even to himself? The removal remained in effect for the remainder of Carson's tenure and beyond. She did not appear on The Tonight Show again until 2014, 22 years after Carson's retirement and 9 years after his death, when Jimmy Fallon finally invited her back. By then, she had rebuilt her career through sheer determination, reinventing herself multiple times. But the wound never fully healed. In her final years, she still became emotional when discussing Carson. "He gave me my career," she told an interviewer, tears streaming. "And I hurt him. That pain never goes away." She died in September 2014. Her daughter found 37 letters in a box in her bedroom. Each one began, "Dear Johnny." Each one had been torn apart. Her daughter said, "My mother wrote these letters every year. On the anniversary of her first Tonight Show appearance, she would write, she would cry, then she would tear them up, because she knew Johnny would never read them." 37 years, 37 letters. Not one was ever sent. You know what the tragedy is? It's not that he refused to forgive her, it's that she never forgave herself. And in the end, both of them paid the price for a wound that never healed. But at least she knew what she did wrong. The next person? He had no idea until it was too late. When violence came to the stage, the threat and the glass. Wayne Newton, Shelley Winters. If the first person broke trust, the next two broke something else, the sanctuary of the stage. The second person was a Las Vegas entertainer who had been a frequent target of Carson's monologue jokes throughout the 1970s. Jokes about his image, his suspiciously youthful appearance. The jokes were relatively mild by Tonight Show standards, but they hit a nerve. The breaking point in 1980, when Carson began incorporating jokes with certain implications about this entertainer's personal life. Implications that, in that era, could destroy a career, especially one built on performing in conservative markets. What happened next became one of the most notorious backstage confrontations in television history. This man didn't call to complain. He didn't have his manager file a complaint. He showed up in person. He bypassed normal security by using his celebrity status, recalled a guard working at NBC's Burbank studios that day. He walked straight to Carson's office, and he wasn't there for a friendly chat. He entered without knocking, found Carson reviewing that night's monologue cards. According to multiple witnesses, and later confirmed by the entertainer himself, he said, "You can make fun of my music, you can make fun of my hair, but if you ever make another joke about my sex, I'll kick your ass." For Carson, who had built his career on fearless comedy and never backing down from a joke, this direct physical threat represented an unforgivable line crossed. Johnny stood up very slowly, recalled his assistant, who was in the room. He was significantly taller, and he used that height advantage. Without raising his voice, he simply said, "Get out of my office before I have you thrown out." The confrontation ended without physical violence, but its repercussions were immediate and permanent. Carson personally instructed his booking team that this entertainer was never to be invited again. A removal that remained in effect for Carson's remaining 30 years as host. Johnny could handle criticism, explained a producer who worked closely with Carson. He could handle angry phone calls. What he couldn't and wouldn't tolerate was physical intimidation. In his mind, this man had transformed from a joke target to a genuine threat. There was no coming back from that. Think about it. The Tonight Show stage was Carson's home, and when someone threatens you in your home, you don't invite them to dinner again. The third person was Hollywood royalty, a two-time Oscar winner whose career spanned decades, classics that defined American cinema. Her talent was undeniable, but by the 1970s, her unpredictable behavior had become legendary. She was brilliant but volatile, explained a director who worked with her. She could be utterly charming one moment and explosively angry the next, especially if she'd been drinking, which by that point was increasingly often. Carson had interviewed her multiple times over the years with generally positive results. She was a natural storyteller with decades of Hollywood experiences to share. But behind the scenes, the Tonight Show staff had begun to worry. She would arrive for pre-interviews, seeming perfectly fine, then show up for the actual taping in a completely different state, recalled a talent coordinator. It became a gamble every time we booked her. Which version would we get? The incident that earned her permanent removal occurred during a 1975 appearance. From the moment she walked on stage, something was wrong. Words slurring, eyes unable to focus. Carson tried to guide her gently through the interview, but she kept interrupting, changing subjects mid-sentence, making comments that didn't quite connect. Johnny kept trying to steer the conversation, remembered a camera operator present that night. You could see him getting increasingly tense, though he was doing his best to maintain the appearance of a normal conversation. The breaking point came when Carson made what seemed to be an innocuous joke about her weight, a topic she herself had addressed humorously in previous appearances. This time, her reaction was dramatically different. "She just snapped," said a stagehand who witnessed it. One second she was laughing, or at least appearing to laugh, and the next second she had thrown her entire drink right in Johnny's face. Not a splash, not a sip. The entire glass of whiskey, ice cubes and all. The audience gasped. Carson, drenched, clearly shocked, maintained enough composure to quickly call for a commercial break. But according to those present, his famous self-control vanished the moment the cameras stopped rolling. He stood up, dripping wet, and just walked off the set without saying a word, recalled a producer. His expression was absolutely murderous. In all my years working with him, I've never seen him that angry. Carson retreated to his dressing room, changed his suit and tie, returned to finish the show, a testament to his professionalism. The actress had been quietly escorted out of the building during the break. The removal was swift and permanent. Carson personally instructed his booking team, never again. It wasn't just about the drink, explained a producer who discussed the incident with Carson afterward. Johnny felt there was an unspoken contract between host and guest, mutual respect, professional behavior. She had violated that contract in the most public and humiliating way possible. But here's something that never made the news. 3 months before that incident, this actress had called Carson's office from a rehabilitation facility. She was trying to get sober. She asked if Carson could mention her recovery on air, just a word of encouragement to give her motivation. Carson declined. "I can't be seen supporting that," he told his producer. 3 months later, she appeared on his show, in the worst state of her life, and was removed forever. So we have to ask, was this justice? Or did Carson create the very monster he later punished? 2 people. One threatened violence. One committed it. Both crossed a line Carson would never tolerate. They brought chaos to his sanctuary. But here's what's interesting. The next group didn't threaten anyone, didn't throw anything. They just weren't good enough. And for Johnny Carson, that was just as unforgivable. The cost of mediocrity. Case 4 and 5. The author and the impressionist. Truman Capote. Rich Little. The fourth person was one of America's most celebrated writers, the brilliant mind behind works that defined American literature, whose razor-sharp wit and distinctive voice had made him a talk show favorite throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. But by 1975, when he appeared on The Tonight Show, this writer was in the midst of a devastating spiral. Alcohol and substances had begun to affect his public appearances. You could tell something was wrong the moment he walked out, recalled a stage manager present that night. Unsteady on his feet, speech slurred, eyes couldn't seem to focus. Johnny looked concerned before he'd even reached the guest chair. Carson himself was no stranger to alcohol in his private life, but he had a strict professional policy. Guests must be coherent and functional during their appearances. Johnny believed viewers invited him into their homes each night, explained a producer. He took that responsibility seriously. He wouldn't embarrass his audience by showcasing someone who was clearly incapacitated. As the interview began, the writer's condition became painfully obvious. Struggling to complete sentences, losing his train of thought mid-word, making inappropriate comments about other celebrities. Johnny tried every interviewing trick in his considerable arsenal, remembered a director witnessing the disaster. Short, simple questions, tried to guide him toward topics discussed in pre-interview, even attempted to turn it into a comedy bit. Nothing worked. The breaking point came when the writer began telling a rambling story about a Hollywood party that veered into territory completely inappropriate for broadcast standards. Carson quickly interrupted, threw to commercial break earlier than scheduled. During the break, according to multiple witnesses, Carson confronted him directly. "You're not well tonight. We're going to cut this short." The writer tried to argue he was fine, but his words were so slurred they only proved Carson's point. When the show returned from commercial, Carson quickly wrapped up the interview. The scheduled 10-minute segment had lasted barely 4 minutes. Carson personally instructed his booking team, "Never again." Johnny was furious, explained a producer who spoke with Carson after the show, but not primarily at him. He was angry at his handlers for allowing him to appear in that condition, and at himself for not recognizing the problem before cameras rolled. For a writer whose career depended on promoting new work, losing access to The Tonight Show was devastating. His last major book received far less promotion than it would have with a Carson appearance. Sales reflected that. Johnny wasn't judging his personal demons, observed a friend of Carson's years later. He was protecting his show's integrity. There's a difference between having a few drinks before an appearance and being completely incoherent on national television. The message was clear. Show up impaired, and it would be your last appearance on television's most important stage. In contrast to the author, the fifth person had no issues with substances. His problem was different: creative laziness. This impressionist had appeared on The Tonight Show more than 30 times between the 1960s and 1970s. He was one of Carson's most frequent guests. His vocal impressions of celebrities and politicians made him a viewer favorite. Then, mysteriously, he simply vanished from the lineup. His disappearance from the show wasn't like the other explosive removals, explained a talent booker. There was no single incident you could point to. He just gradually became unwelcome for reasons that weren't clear to most of the staff. According to those closest to the situation, the removal stemmed from a growing personal dislike Carson developed behind the scenes. Johnny found him increasingly annoying off camera, revealed a producer. He had a habit of staying in character, doing impressions constantly, even when cameras weren't rolling. What audiences found entertaining for 10 minutes, Johnny had to endure for hours during rehearsals and commercial breaks. This tendency to remain on at all times reportedly grated on Carson, who valued authenticity in personal interactions. Johnny once muttered, "Does he even have his own voice?" after a particularly exhausting pre-show meeting, recalled a writer who overheard the comment. It wasn't said as a joke. There was real irritation behind it. But the final straw was more substantive. Carson became convinced this man was recycling material, bringing back impressions and jokes he had already performed on previous appearances with only minimal changes. Johnny was obsessive about fresh material, explained a longtime staff member. He had an almost photographic memory for comedy bits. With this guy appearing so frequently, Johnny started noticing patterns, repetitions that viewers at home might miss. For Carson, this perceived laziness was unforgivable. Rather than confronting him directly, Carson simply instructed his booking team to stop calling. When the Impressionist's management would reach out, they were told, "Schedule is full," or "Going in a different direction." It was a soft removal rather than an explosive one, noted the talent booker. Johnny never said, "I never want to see him again," like with some others. He just said, "I think we've seen enough of him for a while." That while turned out to be forever. Two people, one destroyed by his demons, one destroyed by his complacency. Both lost Carson's stage forever. Think about what that reveals. Carson didn't just care about ratings, he cared about excellence. You know that feeling when you walk into an old repair shop, the kind where the elderly mechanic will only work on cars he loves. He won't touch a vehicle if the owner doesn't respect it, not because he's arrogant, but because he respects his craft. Carson respected television that way. If you showed up intoxicated, you were disrespecting 60 million viewers who invited you into their homes. If you recycled old material, you were insulting their intelligence. Carson didn't remove them because he was cruel. He removed them because he believed audiences deserved better. But the final 3 removals, those were different. They didn't fail professionally. They succeeded. And that's exactly what threatened Carson most. When the new world threatened the old. The actor, the brothers, the provocateur. Charles Grodin. The Smothers Brothers, Tom and Dick Smothers. Morton Downey Jr. The sixth person should have been a perfect Tonight Show guest. Intelligent, quick-witted, capable of the dry, slightly sardonic humor that Carson himself favored. He played a character when he appeared, the difficult guest. At first, Carson enjoyed it. It was smart performance art. But in 1990, this actor's bit veered into territory that struck too close to Carson's personal insecurities. He began mocking Carson's interviewing skills, suggesting Carson didn't actually care about guests, just went through the motions for a paycheck. Johnny's smile got very tight, recalled a camera operator. There's a difference between his performance smile and his genuine smile. Anyone who worked with him knew the difference immediately. This was the forced smile that meant he was not amused. When the segment ended and they cut to commercial, Carson turned to his producer. 4 words. "We're done with that." Everyone knew exactly what he meant. This actor was never booked again. The 7th removal. 2 brothers who were cultural lightning rods. Their variety show had been canceled for being too political, outspoken opposition to war, pointed satire. When they appeared on The Tonight Show, they attempted to transform their segment into political discourse. Carson hated that. He wasn't Republican or Democrat. He was an entertainer. "Too much trouble for what we get," he told his producer. The brothers entered what staff called Carson Purgatory, not formally removed, but mysteriously never invited back. And the 8th person? He represented everything Johnny Carson was not. Loud, confrontational, deliberately provocative, explicitly political. His syndicated talk show featured him screaming at guests, blowing cigarette smoke in their faces, whipping audiences into frenzied states. Where Carson cultivated civility, this man embraced chaos. When he appeared on The Tonight Show in 1988, he refused to sit in the guest chair. He moved around the stage as if it were his own show, interrupted Carson's questions, addressed the audience directly rather than engaging in conversation. Johnny's expression was arctic, remembered a camera operator. He sat back slightly in his chair, a move the crew recognized as Carson disengaging from a guest he'd decided was not worth his attention. Carson wrapped up the segment earlier than scheduled. After the show, his assessment was blunt. "That's not television. It's a circus act. And this isn't the big top." The man was never invited back. 3 men, 3 different styles, but the same crime. They didn't respect what Carson represented. 1 mocked the host in his own home. 2 turned entertainment into propaganda. 1 turned dialogue into chaos. And Carson? He had spent 30 years proving that television didn't need to be loud to be important. This is like when you run a classic diner, the kind where everyone knows each other's names, where the menu hasn't changed in 50 years, where the coffee is always hot and the pie always fresh. Then someone opens a fast food place next door. Loud, fast, cheap. You don't hate them for competing. You're sad because the world has changed. And maybe you're the last person who still believes in the old way. Carson wasn't just removing these people. He was fighting against a future he didn't want to see. A future where civility is weakness, where being loud is being strong, where truth matters less than ratings. And when you look at television today, maybe he was right. We've heard 8 stories now, 8 people erased. And if you're like me, maybe you're thinking, Johnny Carson was a tyrant, a cold man who wielded power without mercy. But wait, what if we've been looking at this story wrong from the beginning? Because there's a question we haven't asked. Why would an intelligent, successful man who could choose anyone as a guest spend emotional energy hating these people? Why not simply forget them? To answer that question, we need to go back to Nebraska, to a boy named Johnny, and the first lesson he learned about love. The turning point. The wounded child. To understand why Carson removed those 8 people, we have to understand what happened to a 10-year-old boy at a county fair in Norfolk, Nebraska. The year was 1935. Young Johnny had been practicing magic tricks for months. He performed at the local county fair, did it perfectly. The audience, farmers, neighbors, people who knew his family, applauded wildly. Afterward, he ran to his mother, Ruth. "Mom, did I do good?" She looked down at him. "Your shirt is dirty," and walked away. That was the lesson. Love is not a right, it's a reward for perfection. And if you're not perfect, you will be abandoned. Homer Carson, Johnny's father, was a power company manager, a man who came home silent, who ate dinner without speaking, who never once told his son he loved him. Ruth Carson was different. She spoke, but only to criticize, to point out flaws, to demand more. Have you ever grown up in a house where you had to earn approval, where every dinner felt like a test, where one small mistake could turn the atmosphere to ice for days? If you have, then you understand Johnny Carson, because he spent 30 years on television creating a world where he decided who deserved love and who would be abandoned. Every night at 11:30, Johnny Carson performed perfection. Perfect suit, perfect timing, perfect smile. Because he learned, if you're not perfect, you lose everything. But here's what that perfection cost him: 4 marriages, estrangement from his sons, a reputation as the most emotionally distant man in Hollywood. David Letterman, who worked with Carson and succeeded him, once said, "Johnny was the kindest, most generous man I ever met, but I never felt like I actually knew him. It was like there was a glass wall between him and everyone else." Now, let's look at those 8 people again, but this time through different eyes. The protégé who betrayed him. She didn't just leave for another show. She triggered every abandonment wound from his childhood. If you aren't loyal, you will be abandoned. That's what Ruth taught him. So, he abandoned her first. The entertainer who threatened him. He didn't just make a physical threat. He challenged Carson's control, the one thing Carson needed to survive. If you lose control, you invite the pain. That was Homer's lesson. So, Carson removed the threat completely. The actress who threw a drink. She didn't just cause a scene, she brought chaos to the sanctuary, the one place Carson could be safe. Without order, everything falls apart. That was his terror. So, he eliminated the chaos. The author who appeared intoxicated. He didn't just embarrass himself. He represented loss of control, the thing Carson feared most. Lose your grip, and you lose your dignity. That was the nightmare. So Carson protected his world from that nightmare. The impressionist who got lazy. He didn't just repeat material. He represented imperfection, the unforgivable sin. If you aren't perfect, you aren't worthy. Ruth's voice forever. So Carson cut him off. The actor who mocked him. He didn't just critique. He suggested everything was fake. Carson's deepest fear about himself. If the mask slips, you cease to exist. The existential terror. So Carson made him not exist. The brothers who politicized. They didn't just have opinions. They brought conflict into the safe space, violating the sanctuary. Let the conflict in, and the sanctuary dies. The childhood lesson. So Carson locked them out. The provocateur who brought chaos. He didn't just have a different style. He represented a future where Carson's values, civility, control, excellence, were obsolete. If their world wins, you become a ghost. The ultimate fear. So Carson rejected him completely. Do you see it now? Every removal wasn't about power. It was about survival. Johnny Carson wasn't punishing these people. He was protecting a wounded 10-year-old boy who learned that love is conditional, control is survival, and perfection is the price of not being abandoned. Each removal was that boy saying, "You can't hurt me if I hurt you first. You can't leave me if I leave you first. You can't abandon me if I abandon you first." He spent 30 years building a wall made of rules, a wall made of standards, a wall made of control. And when someone tried to break through, he did the only thing that wounded child knew how to do: remove them from his life completely. So the question isn't, why was Carson so cruel? The question is, who is the real victim in this story? The legacy. The Man Who Erased Himself, May 22, 1992. After 30 years, Johnny Carson left The Tonight Show. In his final program, he didn't invite guests, just him, a chair, and 50 million viewers. He said, "I am one of the lucky people in the world. I found something I always wanted to do, and I have enjoyed every single minute of it." Then he smiled, waved, and disappeared through the rainbow curtain for the last time. He retired to a beachfront house in Malibu. No interviews, no public appearances, no award shows. The man who had been the center of America vanished completely. In 2005, Johnny Carson died, age 79, emphysema. According to his will, he requested no public memorial service, no monument, no tribute. The man who had the power to erase anyone ultimately erased himself. There's something about that final show that haunts me. Carson didn't invite a single guest, just one chair, empty. A journalist asked him later, "Why didn't you invite anyone?" Carson replied, "Because I didn't want to owe anyone a goodbye." Do you understand what he was saying? Even in his final moment, he was afraid that someone would leave him before he could leave them, so he left everyone one last time. The empty chair wasn't a choice. It was a statement. I have been alone my entire life, and I will end alone, because that's safer than letting anyone close enough to hurt me. And suddenly, everything becomes clear. Johnny Carson didn't remove those 8 people because he hated them. He removed them because he had spent his entire life building a wall to make sure no one could hurt him again. The protege betrayed him. The wall got higher. The entertainer threatened him. The wall got thicker. The actress threw a drink. The wall lost its windows. Each time he was hurt, he added another layer of brick until he realized that the wall protecting him from pain was also preventing him from love. You know that feeling when you meet someone, maybe your father, maybe your grandfather, maybe an old friend, who seems to have everything: success, respect, power. But when you look into their eyes, you see something empty. That's the price of perfection. That's the price of never letting anyone close. Johnny Carson had everything, but he died alone, without the protege he loved like a daughter, without the friends he had removed, just silence. And we realize those removals were never about those 8 people. They were always about Johnny Carson, a man who spent his life building a fortress to protect a wounded child. But when the fortress was complete, he looked around and realized there was no one left to let inside. The question we must ask ourselves, but here's the hardest truth. We, the audience, were complicit. 60 million Americans watched Johnny Carson every night. We laughed when he mocked that Las Vegas entertainer. We applauded when the protege disappeared from his show. We nodded in agreement when he cleaned up his stage. We wanted a just king, but we also wanted a ruthless king, as long as the victim wasn't us. I remember sitting on that old couch next to my father, watching Johnny Carson, and when he removed someone, we didn't question it. We believed they deserved it. We believed Carson was right. But now, looking back, were we watching a man protect his standards, or were we watching a man slowly suffocate himself with those same standards? And here's the question that should keep us up at night. Are we doing the same thing in our own lives? Have you ever removed an old friend because they said something you didn't like? Have you ever deleted someone's number without explanation? Have you ever built a wall around your heart and called it protecting yourself? Our generation grew up in an era when men didn't cry. Families didn't discuss emotions. You kept problems inside the house, never exposed them. We learned how to build walls, just like Johnny Carson. And now, at 50, 60, 70 years old, Many of us sit in large houses with money, with successful careers, but no one to call. Is that what we learned from Johnny Carson? That perfection matters more than connection? That pride matters more than forgiveness? That being right matters more than being loved? Maybe Carson wasn't the tyrant. Maybe we are all little Johnny Carsons, each of us keeping our own private list of people we'll never forgive. Each of us with our own walls, our own empty chairs. And maybe when we look in the mirror, we'll see the same eyes. The eyes of someone powerful, but lonely to the bone. Johnny Carson died in 2005, but the walls he built are still standing in each of us. The question is, do we have the courage to tear them down?